Good afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish. My name is Liddy, and so I'm joined today on the Full Scottish. I've got two great guests with us here. We've got Siobhan Tolland and Simon. I'm sorry, Simon, your name has just dropped out of my head.
Simon Barrow.
Simon Barrow, yes. Might as well get that over and done with right at the start of the show. I'm always getting people's names wrong. So Siobhan Tolland is an author and is SNP councillor for Lochee in Dundee. She's also an activist and founder member of the community group Dundee Together. Welcome, Siobhan. And Simon Barrow is director of the Politics, Ethics and Beliefs think tank Ekklesia and is editor of and author of 5 books on Scottish politics, most recently A Better Nation, The Challenges of Scottish Independence. Welcome, Simon.
Good morning. Well, is it? No, it's good afternoon. I'm getting the time of day wrong now. Yeah. It's a breakfast show. We're allowed to do this now.
That's true, yeah, it's fine. So I'll just do our routine, usual, I'm sad to say routine, Ukraine update, day 543. Russian missile strike on a central square in the historic northern Ukrainian city of Chernihiv killed 7 people, including a 6-year-old child, and injured 144 people on Saturday, authorities said. Denise Brown, the UN's humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, condemned it as a heinous attack. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukrainian forces would give a notable response to the terrorist attack. Of the injured, 15 were children, he said. 15 others were police. Most of the victims were in vehicles crossing the road or returning from church. The strike occurred during the Orthodox holiday of the Transfiguration of the Lord. 41 people were in hospital on Saturday, Regional Governor Charles said. Welcoming the news that US F-16s would be transferred to Ukraine once its pilots were trained, Ukrainian Defence Minister Oleksiy Reznikov said that training Ukrainian pilots to operate F-16 fighter jets had already begun, but it would take at least 6 months to complete their training. Following a meeting with Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson on Saturday, President Zelensky said that he had begun preliminary discussions with Sweden on the possibility of receiving Gripen jets to boost its air defences. The two leaders announced that the two countries agreed to strengthen cooperation on production, training and servicing of Swedish CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles. The Ukrainian Air Force said it shot down 15 out of 17 Russian drones targeting northern, central and western regions overnight into Saturday. Civilian infrastructure was damaged in at least 2 regions, authorities said. Russia's Defence Ministry reported a flurry of Ukrainian drone attacks on Saturday, targeting the Moscow region, Novgorod to the northwest of the Russian capital, and Belgorod, which borders Ukraine. The ministry said nobody was hurt. The Belgorod region, more than 600 kilometres from Moscow, is a vital stop on Russian supply lines and is frequently targeted by drones and missiles. And our final item, Vladimir Putin visited top military officials in the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don near the Ukrainian border. The Kremlin said the Russian president listened to reports from Valery Gerasimov, the commander in charge of Moscow's operations in Ukraine, and other top military figures at the headquarters of Russia's Southern Military District. So, Siobhan, was there anything in today's Ukraine update that caught your eye?
I think that, I suppose the comment that you made at the start, that this is unfortunately a regular routine now, and it feels like it's going on forever, that Ukraine seem to be caught in a perpetual invasion, which is extraordinarily difficult to resolve by the looks of things. The good news, I suppose, is that Russia's not had the kind of walkover that they expected, but it's a horrendous situation. And, this kind of daily update, it's informative, but it just kind of underpins the kind of depressing nature that there is an invasion on our doorstep, and we seem pretty helpless to defend them.
Thank you, Siobhan. Simon, how about yourself? What do you think, or how do you feel about the situation in Ukraine?
Well, it is obviously a deeply depressing situation, but it also presages the wider question of the future of security in Europe and indeed for the world, and how we're going to move to some kind of resolution of the situation. We're in a military standoff. There isn't going to be a military solution in the end. There's got to be a political solution. There are now fresh moves, in the United Nations towards doing that. Simply pumping more and more weapons in on both sides is leading to a worse and worse death toll. But there are serious issues, not only about containing Putin, and that's a key issue, but about the future of security in the European and world theatres as well. And that's really the focus that we need to have in order to be able to look at possible solutions to this.
Thank you, Simon. I'll move on to our first item, which is climate change denial and inertia. As we're gathered here in the studio today, there are tens of thousands of people that might have to flee at short notice from their homes, running away from wildfires in British Columbia. And I'm sure we've all seen the devastating pictures from the Hawaiian island of Maui, where 114 people in the town of Lahaina died, while others were forced to leap into the ocean to escape a wildfire fanned by high winds of a Pacific hurricane. I've got a big long list of climate things that are going wrong, disasters and the like, but the idea about climate denial and inertia, I'd just like to mention that President Biden, the Biden administration, has been keeping fossil fuel prices low, fearing voter backlash if petrol and heating costs rise, as they did last year after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Climate change could enter a political discourse when parties realise that younger voters care about it. Earlier this month, youth activists won a court case in Montana establishing their right to a clean and healthful environment. My question, I'll come to you first, Siobhan, is there some kind of disconnect when events across the globe are ignored by politicians and voters alike? And if that is the case, why, do you think?
That's I suppose a social psychology question in the first instance, that there is a kind of perhaps a safety in collective denial at this stage, because we can see it. The evidence is that the globe's beginning to burn as a result of this. So perhaps it's kind of a bit scary to acknowledge that and take action. But at the same time, the political aspect of that is that I think that the power structures, and let's look at the UK government as a good example of that here as well. And you talked about the Held versus Montana case, but there's also a case that's been taken forward in Honolulu, which is suing the oil companies because they created misinformation about the climate crisis. So there's an echo there of the kind of the anti-smoking campaigns, the kind of suing that happened against the smoking cigarette companies a way back, because they peddled misinformation about the health impact or the lack of health impact of cigarettes. And we've got the same thing happening here with oil as well, where they peddled misinformation saying that oil did not impact on climate change. So this suing in Honolulu has just kind of reached its next stage. The oil companies tried to prevent that from moving forward. But back to my point is this. So in some areas, we have an actual opposite of denial. We have an attempt to hold the oil companies responsible for this in areas. There's lots of kind of legal action across the globe now looking at oil companies and the impact and the damage that they've done. But here in the UK, what we've got, of course, is Rishi Sunak doing or Rishi Sunak's family doing deals with oil companies, and then actually basically putting forward legislation that will go dig for more oil. So we have that disconnect because it's pushed by a political agenda. And to a certain extent, that kind of sense of denial meets that agenda, because we can all kind of pretend that it's not happening, that the impact of this is not going to be as bad as what we think we'll have. But you've got that politics, which is driving more oil extraction when we absolutely know that we should not be doing that, and all the evidence is facing. It's like a kind of collective misinformation that some of us unfortunately buy into, and we're being pushed to buy into that as well. I think that's where the disconnect is. I think just one final point, and this is, you mentioned this yourself, and I want to pick up on that. the young people. You'll notice that I think it was young people in the Held versus Montana that kind of took that to court. It's kind of young people that are taking that on board. I hope that young people won't accept this. I hope they won't accept this legislation that comes in. And I think that there's an element here, and I saw this a few years ago, that the children are acting more adult than adults in terms of accepting their global responsibility. But we're leaving them with a legacy that is not good, and they're the ones that have to clean up the mess. Perhaps they shouldn't have that burden, but they seem to have taken it, and they seem to have acted with honour and with actual care and collective concern. So, hopefully hopefully the young people will basically say no.
Thank you, Siobhan. I'll just quickly add another couple of instances, Simon, before we come to you. The smoke from Canadian wildfires, which have burnt a record-breaking 14 million hectares of forest this year. That's the size of Greece. And that smoke drifted into New York earlier this summer, leading to dangerous air quality for millions of people hundreds of miles away from the blazes. And in Phoenix, in the US, temperatures stayed above 23 degrees Celsius for 31 days straight earlier this year. But same question to you, really, as we had to Siobhan. What will happen? Or what will happen when there's no water? Sorry.
Well, yes, obviously, the world is on fire. The situation is already incredibly serious, and that's before we get to the impact on poor communities in the developing world, which is going to be absolutely devastating. But the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is absolutely categorically clear that action is not about tomorrow, it's about now. And if we look at climate denialism, Siobhan has already referred to the vested interests of the fossil fuel industry, its impact on politics, Rishi Sunak being a clear example of that, and the misinformation that also spreads, of course, on social media. That's one aspect of it. And that's going to delay talking constantly to action and then not actually doing anything about it. Now, the Climate Change Act at the UK level includes a legal commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 100% of the 1990 levels, that is to net zero by 2050. And already the key measures that we're supposed to be taking in relation to that are being rowed back. Labour has also it had a reasonably ambitious looking programme on climate change, but it's already announced that it's going to delay expenditure on that. If it gets into government, we can expect perhaps more delay. Delayerism is a huge, huge issue. Also, as part of the denial agenda is finding someone else to blame. Usually it's China. Yes, China has been a major contributor towards greenhouse emissions, but it's also taking more action than most of the countries that actually criticise it at the moment. Sideshows like carbon capture, which is a bit of a debating point here in Scotland, which is really being used by the fossil fuel industry just to delay action. It has unproven technologies behind it. It's massively expensive. It's not necessarily where, and indeed isn't where, you should be putting the investment. And there are also kind of lots of bad arguments that I'm afraid even seep into our own politics. I heard at a conversation I was having recently with a former Scottish government minister saying, oh, well, the UK and Scotland's only 1% of global targets and so on. This is a terrible argument. We have transnational corporations operating on our territory. We are a main part of fossil industry, obviously, and we have to look at just transition seriously than we are at the moment. And the question then becomes, what can we do and what can we engage the public in? Two things to say about that. The first is we do need to be clear about the main target. Look at the 50 largest corporations in the world. If we look at the military, if we look at just individuals in the world, probably only about 20 of them, they are a massive amount of the damage that is being committed at the moment. So we need to not let them go with this, and particularly call out greenwashing, attempt to put up a few green projects while being done. Scotland, we are behind with our targets towards net zero. We have a more ambitious target than the UK, 2045. We've done lots of things to make excuses ourselves. The Labour government there, government is looking at a national energy company.
Simon.
Policy for twice. The Scottish government is delaying on that. We need a major in order to look at public sector solutions, in order to involve trade unions and working people in a just, we need a clear roadmap, we need a jobs register, not to
Simon,
get
the line's
just
not very good to
like,
you at the moment.
heat pumps and so on. We need to take action on the big issue. That's the agenda that we and I the public want to that kind of action as well.
Simon, thank you. But the line's not very good to you at the moment. There's a lot of breaking up there, but I hope people were able to get the gist of what you were saying. And just before we move on to the next item, we'll just hark back to something you were saying, Siobhan, about young people. We're talking about climate inertia, climate change inertia, and it's like it seems to me that Greta Thunberg and the amount of stick that she gets kind of is illustrative of what we've all been talking about here today. But I'll move on to the next item, which is the three-ring circus that is Donald Trump. Donald Trump was saying, "Give me a break, guys. Just find me 11,000 votes." With his phone call, will his phone call be enough to put Trump and his Confederates behind bars? This is a phone call that Trump has now been indicted in the state of Georgia. It's an exceptional set of charges. He's been charged with racketeering after allegedly attempting to meddle with election results. He's now got 91 criminal charges against his name and counting in 4 separate indictments. No other president has ever faced a single criminal charge. Fani Willis, District Attorney for Fulton County in Georgia, said all elections in our nations are administered by the states. That's the states as in Georgia and Texas and the like, which are given the responsibility of ensuring a fair process and accurate counting of votes. Donald Trump, on hearing this new indictment, said it's a witch hunt and a stain on America, predictably. Millions of Americans agree with Trump, but not every Republican does. Brad Raffensperger had taped a conversation that he had with Donald Trump at the time of the Georgia vote counting in the previous presidential race. And we're going to be hearing a lot about RICO, R-E-C-O, which stands for Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organisations Act. That's a piece of legislation in Georgia which is being used against Trump. It's usually used against criminal gangs like the mafia and organised crime. And the important thing is maybe that if Donald Trump was to get back into the White House, as if he wins the next presidential election, he can rescind or he can excuse himself from all the federal charges that are against his name, but he cannot remove this one because it's from the state of Georgia. So Simon, I'll come to you first. What do you think's going on in America at the moment?
Well, I mean, obviously, this tape is one part of a much bigger picture. Trump is now indicted in 4 jurisdictions, over 90 different charges. Serious ones relate to the incident on January the 6th. But really, all determined by a mix of law and politics, and it's difficult to call because, of course, jury trial. So it wouldn't on, I mean, on the face of it, these charges look absolutely damning. But it will be determined by what juries say. Some of the most powerful charges against Trump are going to be tried in states where actually the jury pools might be likely to be slightly more favourable towards him. So we can't really call what's going to happen. Trump himself is, of course, trying to present himself as a martyr. He's trying to call into question of the legal institutions, of judges that he appointed, of absolutely anybody who stands in his way, and he has a very solid base behind him on doing that. Having said that, a recent poll suggested that up to 60% of voters in America don't want Trump to be president next time. But that depends on voting. It depends on a credible campaign by Biden. It depends upon addressing the real economic concerns of blue-collar Americans, particularly blue-collar white Americans who've tended to vote for Trump in the past. So very issues. I think democracy in America is completely under threat if it's back in 2024. It's incredibly important that people come together. But that's only if there's an alternative, and that's one of my worries about the current situation.
Thank you, Simon. The line's still incredibly shaky to you, but hopefully it'll improve as the show goes on. Siobhan, just maybe a slightly different question for you. This Georgia indictment apparently is going to be televised. Do you think that would go in Trump's favour or not? It seems that every time he gets indicted, support goes up for him.
Oh, geez, I don't know. I mean, he is quite the performer, isn't he? And he does play to the crowd. I mean, it's one of the things he's actually very good at. What I think we're seeing, and Simon picked up on us a little bit in terms of the general US population not necessarily wanting Donald Trump at this point, but actually his support within the Republican Party is actually increasing over the last few months. And it seems that the more indictments he gets, the more Republicans kind of rally behind him to that certain extent. And you can see that I think the whole ideology and the whole discourse behind Trump was the one powerful man being picked upon by the state, and this almost reinforces that narrative is untrue as we perhaps might think. So from a Republican perspective, that seems to kind of follow through. It can go either way, I mean, it might actually solidify support within the Republicans, but it may just put people off. I mean, the thing about Donald Trump is he's so erratic. He's so ridiculously narcissistic sometimes. And remember, of course, that he lost the last election, regardless of what he says. He did lose the last election, which is highly unusual in American history. Most presidents usually do the two terms. So in that sense, that the dislike or the unease with Donald Trump and the politics that he was portraying was perhaps not going down as well as perhaps he thought, and perhaps the Republicans seem to think as well. They seem to think that going further hard right will somehow be the benefit of them, in the same way, we'll get to that in a minute, in the same way that the Labour Party seem to be doing as well. One thing that kind of goes round and round in my mind, though, is the Hannah Arendt quote from The Origins of Totalitarianism, and it's talking about understanding the language of totalitarianism, which is, see it not as a statement of fact, but a statement of intent. And since Donald Trump got into power in 2016 was that? I can't remember the date, but he talked about the potential corruption within an election. And this was an accusation that constantly was put forward. But then here we have this kind of, clip of, come on, guys, just get me 11,000 votes. So not a statement of fact, but a statement of intent. His accusations of corruption actually ended up looking like it was him that was kind of pushing that corruption itself. So that's a kind of an interesting take. We'll see what happens. It feels very show trial-y, and that's not in any way a defence of Trump to that extent. I think he'll create it into a show trial if it's televised. He loves to play the victim, as I think Simon had said. So we've got that element there as well. I hope that it will turn people off. I really hope it does, and expose Donald Trump for what he is.
Thank you, Siobhan. Simon, we've got literally a minute and a half maybe. I just wanted to flag up that in Milwaukee on this coming Wednesday evening, there's going to be, talking about televised things, there's going to be the first televised debate of the Republican presidential candidates. But some of them have refused to say that they will sign the pledge that they will get behind a nominated candidate. That includes Mike Pence and Donald Trump. Nobody's even sure if Donald Trump is going to show up. But again, a similar question to Siobhan, if he does show up, do you think he'll be given a tough time by the party? And if he doesn't show up, would that be because he's too scared to show his face?
Well, I could be wrong here, but I suspect he won't show up. Why should he really bother? What he wants is for the Republican Party, or the part of the Republican Party that actually opposes him, to be as divided as possible. He wants as many candidates against him as possible so that he stands the best chance of winning. And he will, of course, slate anybody who tries to draw attention to facts that are inconvenient to him. So that's the kind of internal politics of the thing. And he has, of course, effectively, as Siobhan said, mounted a takeover of the leading parts of the Republican Party. In the end, it's going to be decided by voters. I agree with Siobhan. I hope that people will be turned off. But again, the Democrats cannot be complacent about this. I mean, Hillary Clinton failed to campaign in some of the key blue regions. That was a massive mistake. It looks like Biden will be fairly slow off the mark this time as well. And then, of course, there's the whole future of the two-party system, which are really two wings of the same corporate America at the moment. And that's really what has driven the growth of Trump and this move towards neo-fascism. And we need voices also that are going to be that. Cornel West standing as the third candidate. I hope that doesn't split the vote again, but perhaps he can highlight some of the major changes in American politics which need to be addressed if democracy is rescued.
Thank you, Simon. We'll continue to be patient with your line again. Hopefully it'll improve. But yeah, thank you. We've got your gist there. Thank you. So the next item is GERS, otherwise known as the Government Expenditure and Revenue in Scotland figures. Every year the Scottish Government produces GERS figures, and these are estimates of the state of Scotland's public finances. They analyse the total tax revenues collected from Scotland and the total spend of the UK Government and the Scottish Government, local government, and on behalf of Scotland. Publication of GERS tends to lead to news coverage on the implication for Scottish independence. Yet GERS is not an analysis of public finances in an independent Scotland. It's an analysis of public finances in Scotland as part of the UK. And indeed, Ian Lang admitted at the time that GERS was created to make the Scottish economy look worse than it actually was. It certainly seems to have succeeded there. So, Siobhan, I remember you played an important role in Cllr and to do with local government, so I'll come to you first. The Bottom Line is an initiative that was launched in 2022 by 3 economists who want to bring GERS and they want it to be scrapped. And so have you had a chance to look at the report, and maybe you could tell us something about it?
I mean, a little bit. Is it the Bottom Line report, I'm assuming, that you're talking about?
Yes, sorry if I didn't say that. Yes, it's
yes, yeah, I assumed that. But I mean, a little bit. I think that GERS is a kind of hot political potato, isn't it? That always kind of gets used at this moment in terms of bringing into the constitutional debate. It feels a little bit simultaneously. It seems to prove that, Scotland is an economic basket case, but at the same time prove that we're also kind of have the benefits of the union. But I think that, and this is the kind of point, isn't it? And Business for Scotland are very good at this as well. Now we'll get to the Bottom Line report, but effectively what it is it's the UK economics divided into so much percent that Scotland has. It has no bearing on Scotland even really as an economy. Most of the kind of powers that we're talking about is devolved to Westminster. So we're talking about kind of massive spending. Defence is a very good example. Defence spent by the UK, but we get so much percent, and then that's therefore seen as our spending. It's spending in Scotland, and the difference between that and spending for Scotland, or not even spending for Scotland, it's just anything spent in the UK, Scotland takes its percentage. So it creates a very false impression of what we are. There is no way in GERS that it tells us how we will fare as an independent country. And there's a couple, I think, of core issues here. And the Bottom Line report talks about that in a bit more detail in terms of the deficit, in terms of that. So the political decisions that have been made by the UK government will not or would not have been made by Scotland. So the political decisions that have had economic impact. So Brexit is a really good one. Now, what is it the Bottom Line report says about Brexit? Can't find it. Sorry, I'm just looking for my notes. So basically, total cost of schemes, 4.5 billion in 22-23. The necessary because Brexit had UK higher inflation. So we've got this certain amount of money that's part of our deficit that is basically caused by higher inflation. So caused by things like Brexit and the Liz Truss budget. So there's certain political decisions that have had massive detrimental economic impact on the UK economy that Scotland would never have taken. So it makes those kind of the economic position of Scotland in terms of our so-called deficit is because we were dragged in to those political decisions that the UK and Westminster government did, decisions that Scotland would not have taken. So we're talking about very different political choices that Scotland and the UK would have taken and the impact that would have had on the economy. That's why the situation looks actually probably more severe than it is. The other issue is taxation as well. Scotland managed to kind of offset some of this because we taxed better. So we, in terms of the powers that we have, we do kind of make a difference. The problem with GERS, of course, is that it's just a false comparison. It's just a completely false comparison. There is no way it allows us a sense of how we will fare in an independent country. It's a bit like, you know, taking a kind of country within the EU and saying, well, this is, you know, and you know, taking the EU budget, saying, oh, well, it's because of this. It's a kind of difficult. It's a false argument. I think that's what it is. It's we're kind of getting caught up into this process of, you know, this is how we're going to be, but it's a completely different sense. And I like the bottom line. I like the fact that they're kind of trying to unpick that. I like the fact that they're kind of breaking down that money. And I'm just going to, there's two issues that the bottom line report says, and one of them is the fact that inflation has been so high. So it's caused much more money to be spent. And one of the things that they said that, you know, these I say benefits, but the kind of offsets of the financial aid that we had to pour in because of the energy crisis was actually money that we didn't need to spend, because in fact the inflation got so high and we allowed the energy companies to basically run riot with the costings of it. And the other thing is, as well as in terms of our debt, it's much higher. What is it they said? Increased cost of debt interest with the share of allocate to Scotland is increasing by 68% compared to the previous year. The total increase of that is 4.4 billion. So we've got about 9 billion of that seeming kind of deficit, which could have been offset by different political decisions. That's about 2/3 of that deficit that Scotland has. So it's different political decisions making different economic outcomes. And Scotland is constantly dragged into that. GERS doesn't take political decision making into account. And that's something I think we need to start talking about quite clearly as well. We would make different political decisions. We've showed all the time that we would make different political decisions that would not have the catastrophic economic impact that the UK government has given Scotland and imposed upon Scotland, again, against our will.
Thank you, Siobhan. I mean, I'm no economist. I didn't even get my maths O level, by the way. I don't mind sharing that with you. So Simon, the bottom line say that the Scottish economy has been mismanaged by Westminster, and they, as you said, Siobhan, they cite two things: the huge spending for the cost of living in Brexit, £4.5 billion, and the cost of servicing the UK's massive debt, combined is £8.9 billion just for 2022-23 alone. And they also say that if the Scottish current account deficit for that year were revised to remove these figures, these numbers, then it would fall from 6.4% of GDP to 2.2%, which is well below the UK current account deficit and well within the 3% that's generally regarded as sustainable. But I'll just quickly give you what Alistair Jack said in response to that. He said that the Scottish Secretary claimed that these figures showed that yet again people in Scotland benefit hugely from being part of a strong United Kingdom. Is he right?
Well, of course, he would have said that whatever was put to him, because it's simply a spin line. But no, to the contrary, and as Siobhan has said, what the GERS figures indicate is, first of all, how massively unequal the United Kingdom is, with the whole economy skewed towards London and the southeast. London is effectively a city-state, actually, in the way that it operates economically, and it itself has massive inequality built into it. And yes, we need to be very clear. GERS is about how Scotland performs as part of, as a devolved nation within the United Kingdom, with 70% of the revenues specified in GERS being determined by the UK government and 40% of the expenditure. So that doesn't give us any kind of picture of what kind of different decisions an independent Scotland could make. But I think there's a very important point here beyond the propaganda, because of course GERS Thursday is always used for massive propaganda, is first of all to point out that there are sort of detailed things, like, for example, the good performance of Scotland's onshore economy, which, if you compare it with the north of England, actually is generating £35 million more than our national population share. That's a point that Craig DL of Commonweal has made in his analysis of it in the National, which is well worth reading. But the second thing is, I really do feel that we need to be pushing back in a different way. Every year, when the Scottish Government has to set its budget and it consults with other parties on that, and then the budget is brought back to Parliament and voted on, I would actually like to see the Scottish Government presenting some headline figures as to the different decisions it could make if it had the full powers of independence, and making a bridge between decisions which have to be made about current expenditure within the limits of that are set economically for the Scottish Parliament, and the kind of different decisions that could be taken under independence. Now, those figures, of course, would become part of a sort of propaganda war and be contested and so on. But we're only really hearing one side of it when the Cllr's figures are presented. And I think actually we do need to address the people of Scotland with the different possibilities and choices that actually exist. And the reason that we need far greater powers. We certainly need those greater powers if we are going to address the climate crisis, for example, because, you know, with 35% of the whole of Europe's on and offshore renewable energy potential, the key question is who will make those decisions and who will own those resources and those assets in the future. And that's really where we need to direct the economic debate, because there is a really, really good future for Scotland under independence. But there's also real challenges of transition towards that, which some of the material in Cllr's illustrates some of the, where some of those challenges will lie. But we need to reshape the debate completely.
Thank you, Simon. I'm tempted to move on a wee bit early, so that we can, because I think there's quite a lot to discuss in the next item. So if that's okay with both of you, then I'll move on to Labour in Scotland. So according to the polls, Labour looks set for a massive majority in England. So why do they not have the courage of their convictions instead of saying they will retain Tory policies in government? And this comes at a time when Keir Starmer spent a week in Scotland, and Angela Rayner's been up as well. But Starmer's week in Scotland has been called a washout. The Brexit Labour Party have spent the week in Scotland, and we've had Angela Rayner in Rutherglen with Anna Sarwar and Sir Keir Starmer too. So far, the pro-Brexit Labour Party this week have refused to commit to abolishing the Tory rape clause, suggesting they could implement it more fairly. They've refused to commit to abolishing the Tory bedroom tax. They've claimed there is no division between UK Labour and Scottish Labour, despite disagreeing on a host of policies. They've ruled out devolving employment law or any other laws to the Scottish Parliament, despite previously committing to do just that. They've U-turned on plans to strengthen workers' rights. They've U-turned on the green investment. I think you mentioned that earlier, Simon. Commenting, the SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn said Sir Keir Starmer's visit to Scotland is in on his branch office has been a complete washout. Whether it's refusing to scrap the two-child limit, I'm going to stop reading people's quotes, but one was a really good quote that was mentioned was from David Linden when he said that Anna Sarwar had folded like a deck chair. Siobhan, with your connections, previous connections to Cllr and as an SNP councillor, what do you think about Labour's Scottish trip?
I mean, I don't know what Labour are doing. The history of the Labour Party to me seems to fall into exactly the same trap as they always do. The minute the politics turns more to the right, they think they need to follow that position and turn themselves a little bit more to the right in order to get political credibility, electoral credibility. And I think this is what we're seeing here. I think that Keir Starmer's, it's just... From a Labour Party perspective in the UK, you can see that he has a hard line, or the party has a hard line to straddle. They're trying to win back the northeast areas that voted Brexit. So they're trying to win back those, but at the same time, they seem to be isolating Scottish voters as well, which have, I would say, probably Scotland. Well, Scotland has a more kind of social democratic thinking than certainly what England seemed to be kind of moving in a post-Brexit landscape. So he's kind of trying to straddle that line. So from that perspective, you can see the politics of that. But the problem with Keir Starmer is he is literally dismantling the core values of what Labour used to be. So the kind of the U-turns, as you say, there's green investment. He's U-turning on nationalisation of kind of core industries, for instance, as well. He's U-turning on a more progressive taxation policy. He mentioned he was going to tax the tops 5% higher, and then he's like backtracking on that as well. And and I think this gets to the core of where the Labour Party will flounder. They may win, but they will flounder in that. What is it Keir Starmer says? We need growth, growth and growth. Well, here in Scotland, that is, I think the consensus seems to be that is not where we move forward. And Simon mentioned this earlier on in terms of kind of how we address the climate crisis, how we start resetting the thinking. And you don't reset your thinking by continuously talking about growth, growth, growth. The Labour Party seem to be in this kind of trajectory of just going down this traditional 50-year-old capitalist mode where growth is everything. That is not, I think, where Scotland will go. And I think it's up to the SNP, it's up to the independence movement to push that alternative forward in terms of things like the wellbeing economy, to reset the economic thinking away from the capitalism that has caused so much damage over the last half a century. I think Rutherglen's the test, I think, for Labour and for the SNP at this stage. Rutherglen will be the test to see how much resonance Labour are really making within Scotland, and how much the SNP are holding their support or not holding, is maybe the slightly more depressing element might be. But in terms of that kind of thinking from the Labour Party, I don't see how that could give resonance to people in Scotland, because what we've been clamouring for since the dawn of Thatcher in 1979 is to retain the social democracies that we kept and to create a better, more socially democratic system. I think that sits at the core. Leslie Riddick said this a few months ago, that if you look at the history of Scotland, then actually the majority of people in Scotland have voted social democratic parties, the Labour Party as well as the SNP being generally social democratic. The rise of the Green Party, I think, shows that as well. The problem with the Labour Party, though, is it's continuously hemorrhaging its social democratic policies now in order to kind of try and win over the voters in England to the expense of Scotland. How this general election will go, we've no idea. I think that Labour might be being over optimistic, maybe within the UK as well as in Scotland as well. But that should be across SNP literature. Growth, growth, growth. Are you actually kidding me? Now is the time for something bold. Now is the time for us not to have more of the same, but to have a radical change that will help the well-being of our people, help the well-being of our economy, and help the well-being of our planet. Simon mentioned that earlier on. The crisis is now. That's not just in terms of global warming and climate crisis. It's in terms of the health and well-being of our people as well. That's why the SNP need to be really strong over the next year and a half in terms of coming to the general election, because if we can't offer an alternative to what Labour's given, then we will be in trouble, I think, as a party. But I think we can. The problem with Labour is they never offer an alternative. They always just go Tory light, and it's always been to their detriment, and they never seem to learn from that.
Siobhan, your size, huge, big size, spoke volumes there, so thank you for that. Simon, just a wee bit of context for you. There was a poll out last week that put Labour ahead on the NHS waiting lists issue in England. The poll asked, is Starmer or Sunak most likely to deliver the following? To cut NHS waiting lists, 37% for Starmer, 18% for Sunak. For growing the economy, Siobhan referenced there, 34% for Starmer. Sunak was closer on 29%. The only thing that Sunak is leading on is the small boats out of his 5 pledges. But Starmer is double, 37% is pretty much twice 18% in terms of the NHS waiting list. Do you think these figures help explain why Starmer has no option but to try to tempt Tory voters to vote Labour? But what does it mean for Scottish Labour? Should Scottish Labour therefore just, admit that it's a fictive party and just go along with what the English party's doing?
Well, there are a number of questions located within that question. Let's take them stage by stage. First of all, under Starmer, what you've seen is the reassertion of managerial politics. So there'll be a whole lot of people at UK Labour HQ drilling through the figures of polls to try and figure out what's popular, what's unpopular, how they can maximise their vote in different areas. And really, I think they don't trust the polls at a headline level. They think that the next general election is going to be a lot closer. They're probably not wrong about that. Also, they bought into the idea, particularly in the red wall seats, that people who've previously voted Labour have turned towards reactionary policies, and that's what they have to do. It's a very depressing scenario. It's a tragedy, the Labour Party, because it was an incredibly important part of the constitution of the NHS and the welfare state, has a tremendous history, has had a tremendous base amongst working people across Britain. It seems to have lost all of that. It's worth reminding those of us on the left, however, that there aren't simple solutions to this, because the polling also indicates that if Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, their lead would be about 1% at the moment. He managed to attract thousands and thousands of people to rallies, and I was very sympathetic to the direction he was trying to take Labour in, but it wasn't something that won over the public. He wasn't able to win over people within the party. So, the party faces various challenges in that direction. In terms of Scotland, their pitch is obviously going to be, we're going to be the next government of the UK. That really matters for Scotland, so vote for us. But of course, what's happening in Scotland is that, for example, the Rutherglen by-election is you have a candidate, I'm sure personally, sincerely, articulating policies which are now the opposite of what Labour is saying at the UK level. And it will be the UK Labour that determines the future, not Scottish Labour, which has become a branch office. Scotland hasn't voted in majority for the Tories for nearly 70 years. Siobhan is absolutely right. The drift of Scottish politics is in a very different direction. But it seems to me that the challenge to the SNP is very clear. It's that territory that Labour is abandoning that we have to continue to move into with a renewal of progressive policies. The SNP, in one shape or another, has been in power in Scotland for 16 years. It's very difficult to maintain a momentum. There's a lot of decisions to be taken about governance within the party, about independence strategy, but also really good progressive policies have to be at the core of that. And I should mention, I have a little bit of an investment in that because I am the National Secretary of the Trade Union Group within the SNP. And next Saturday, the 26th, from 10:30 in the morning, we're having a meeting that's open to all members to look at what's coming up on the agenda of the future SNP conference on independence and on inner-party democracy, but also on the kind of policies around economy, environment, public services, health, and so on, which are going to help considerably shape future elections. So that's an opportunity for grassroots members to get involved in the debate. But I mean, I think the last comment I want to make is that one of the tragedies of Scottish politics is, yes, the divide around constitutional questions is really important. And I'm very clear that independence will give Scotland the powers it needs to have strong public services, a decent NHS, real good jobs and economic security for people, and above all, a major just transition towards green energy. We need the powers of independence to do that. But if I put my friends who are in the SNP, in the Greens, in Labour, who are independent socialists or whatever, in a room, we're going to agree about 85% of things. And yet that's not reflected in the way a lot of politics happens. So we need a renewal of progressive politics. We need collaboration wherever possible. And as I say, it's very clear to me that Labour is abandoning the territory that we need to have real change in the future, and that's where the SNP needs to head.
Thank you, Simon. You mentioned Jeremy Corbyn there. I remember I was actually living in England at the time when Jeremy Corbyn would turn up at Glastonbury and he would have tens of thousands of young people chanting his name. But I also remember I would be following Scottish politics at the time, and I would see footage or photographs of Corbyn when he turned up at a Labour rally in Edinburgh, for example, and there'd be like a little tent, a little marquee with about a dozen people standing around. And I don't know if either of you have seen any photographs of Starmer's visit. I wonder if his visits to Scotland, are they similarly sort of thinly attended?
Well, yes,
Can
I mean, I think they are. Sorry,
can I,
Siobhan was going to say.
yeah, no, sorry. Just want to kind of come in on the Corbyn thing actually, because I do think that the Corbyn phenomena, if you want to call it, it was actually quite fascinating. I think from a
Yeah.
Labour Party perspective, and Labour, I think Labour made one core mistake in that. I don't think it was because Jeremy Corbyn was left wing that he began to fail, and this is where the Labour Party, I think, has misinterpreted it. The problem with Corbynism is that its left wing agenda was dated and set somewhere in the 1970s that seemed to disconnect with modern UK and modern Scotland. The Brexit I think of it as a very, very good example of that. His kind of ideas about the Europe was set in the 70s, and he didn't seem to push his politics much forward, that much beyond that. And this is where it was the left become dated within the Labour Party. This is where I think the left is kind of, this is where Scotland's different, because what I think's happened is that the SNP and the independence movement has reimagined the left, or reimagined what it means to be left, and actually made it fit for a modern Scotland and perhaps a modern Britain as well, if you want to take it that forward. What the Labour Party couldn't do, and what Jeremy Corbyn couldn't do, is he couldn't modernise and reinvent the left for a modern UK structure. But the Labour Party seemed to say, oh, it's because it was left. It wasn't. It was because they couldn't make it fit for a modern purpose. And I think that's where the tension lies. It's where the Labour Party always fail, because they think it's a left thing, but actually what it is they don't seem to understand that it needs to be revitalised and modernised for a modern Scotland or a modern Britain.
Thank you, Siobhan. And we've got time to maybe go on to let's see, what does it say about Labour when a former Scottish leader of the Labour Party is no longer a member of the party? That's a reference to Kezia Dugdale. She turned up in Edinburgh at the International Book Festival the other day and was asked about independence. She was speaking at the event, and she said, sorry, she was asked about independence and whether she thought there would be another referendum in Scotland in the next decade, and that was when she admitted that she had moved on the issue and that she could no longer argue for the union with the same strength as she did as part of Better Together in 2014. Asked if she would vote yes in a future referendum, she said she isn't fully yes yet. So yeah, Kezia Dugdale, she's not even a member of the Labour Party anymore. She was Labour of the Scottish Labour Party. We hear about the 40% of people in the Labour Party in Scotland who are pro-independence and who would vote for it. Do you think, I don't know who to ask first, Simon, do you think that Kezia Dugdale is one of those 40%, but she's just not able to say it out loud and in public yet?
Well, I think Kezia probably represents an awful lot of people in Scotland. Some of whom would be in the category of wanting to be for independence, but really not sure about whether it's workable. Others of whom slightly more on the sceptical side, but beginning to see that the UK is an emerging disaster and that the kind of major decisions Scotland needs to take about its future are far better in Scottish hands. I think an awful lot of people like that. And we really need to listen to them, because if Scotland is going to move to independence, it's going to require a further significant shift of public opinion in Scotland. And the people who need to move are the people who are not on side with it at the moment. And what worries me sometimes about the independence movement is that we want to have rallies, we want to do lots of flag waving and all kinds of things which actually don't reach the people who need to change. So I think it's a very positive and honest intervention as well. She's not alone in that. I mean, former First Minister Henry McLeish has also moved a long way on the independence question. I think he just fractionally got to crossing the line in the past. But I think also what it highlights is that amongst working people in Scotland and amongst the trade union and labour movements, and I'm using that word with a lowercase l there, I'd like to see a fresh debate about Scotland's future. If you frame that in terms of yes or no, people go into their holes and start throwing rocks at each other. I'd like to be saying, what powers does Scotland need in order to deliver the things that we all want and that the vast majority of people in Scotland want? A strong NHS and public services, a decent economy and decent jobs, green transition, much more influence over decision making at local level, etc. Where do the powers need to be for that to happen? And if you're on the left and you're arguing against independence, then you need to explain how it's going to happen without that within the devolved settlement. And I think, we are in a times of transition at the moment, and people are rethinking some of the issues. We need a different kind of debate to capture that and enable people to think, where the future really needs to be heading.
Thank you, Simon. Siobhan, just from what Simon said there about Kezia being similar to lots of people in Scotland, and a couple of things that you said, Simon, she kind of chimes with. At the same interview, she said that she's pro-EU and that Labour's stance on Brexit isn't helping her, or is helping her, I would say, perhaps, come over to yes. She wants Starmer to win the next general election because she wants the Tories out. That's kind of a standard Labour response. And of course she is married, I should at least mention this too, she's married to the SNP MSP Jenny Gilruth, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills. Siobhan, what do you think about Kezia Dugdale's position, and can...
I mean, full disclosure, I'm actually a fan of Kezia Dugdale. I was in the Scottish Parliament and Kezia was there, obviously seeing her wife getting sworn in when she became Cabinet Secretary, and I went up and kind of said, "Oh, hello again, I'm a fan," kind of thing. I've always felt for Kezia, and I think that Simon's actually maybe helped me clarify a wee bit in myself why that is, because exactly as he said, she follows, I think, that journey of many people in the Scottish population when Brexit happened. Kezia, I think, and this is one of the things I kind of quite admire about she feels politics at an emotional level, and I kind of respect that in her. But I think the betrayal from the Labour Party that she felt after Brexit was quite clear and quite significant. Remember, she ran off to the jungle and she got a bit kind of erratic at one point, and I think it was that sense of betrayal that she felt because she's passionately for Europe, and she talked about Scotland being in Europe and so forth. So that journey is been a long, slow process coming. I do wonder sometimes, because her father was very pro-independence, and now her kind of wife as well. And you just think, what did they talk about on Sunday dinners? Come on, Kezia, just come over to the side, But there's been that long, slow process, I think, that is reflective of many people within Scotland. And in the 2000 referendum, one of the things I always liked was people's journeys, their political journeys, and how they managed to kind of slowly change their positioning. And I think we're seeing that in Kezia. I think it was an honest account. And I don't necessarily think that her positioning is, I'd like Keir Starmer to win or the Labour Party to win because we can get rid of the Tories. I don't think that's necessarily a Labour position, and it's where the SNP might run into a bit of problems in the general election, is because, we've argued for a long time, anything but the Tories, anything but the Tories, because let's face it, the Tories are horrendous. So, for the ordinary voter on the street, you can see the attraction of going, well, anything but the Tories, the Labour Party have got a chance of getting in. So there is that kind of element as well. So I don't think it's necessarily reflective of a Labour position. I think it could be reflective of a kind of maybe broader position as well, because let's face it, we know the damage that the Tories have done. But yeah, I mean, Kezia's journey is I think, a fascinating one. I feel for her because I think that, she had a party that I think she felt betrayed her, and there is an element of that. And there's grief, and there's grief in that element, I think, as well, because she comes at it from an emotional level. I think her journey is almost set, and I think that she reflects that core. I think that we maybe need to shift, and that I hope will shift inevitably into that positioning, because the Labour Party are not doing themselves any favours, and Westminster are not doing themselves any favours either.
Thank you, Siobhan. I'm in two minds now. I don't know if the voice in my ear is going to be able to say anything, because there's one more item, but technically we're out of time. Are you both able to stay for a couple of minutes? Because I think it's worthwhile. Yeah, okay, thank you. That's great. That time thing happened where I thought we've got loads of time, and then it'll just appear. So He's Scottish has been trending online, which is a reference to the First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, who was asked if he'll be watching the England game in the Women's England football team in the World Cup in Australia. Yousaf said, "I'll be watching the game for sure. I wish the Lionesses every bit of luck." Then he was pressed whether he would be cheering them on or not. And he said, "I'll be cheering them on if you wish. I don't know why you're so obsessed with who I'll be cheering on. I'm not even sure if I'll be able to watch the game or not, given that I'm busy on Sunday. But if I do get to watch watch the game, then I wish both teams the best of luck. And then as he turned away, the camera picked up that the First Minister could be heard saying, honestly. Darren Grimes tweeted afterwards, Scot nationalist bigot Humza Yousaf refuses to bring himself to say he wishes the Lionesses well, settling for saying he wishes both teams well instead. The man is pathetic. I don't know which of you is a bigger football fan. I'm not a football fan at all.
Perhaps I should comment on that because I'm the co-founder of the Scottish Football Supporters Association.
Okay, great.
And I have, as it stands, I think it's 4 minutes of extra time, and Spain are leading 1-0. If people are interested in that, but the thing I'm interested in is the huge attention on women's football. We need now to bed that in, to address the economic issues. We also have to address the issues of football in Scotland. I was involved at Holyrood recently in the launch of a June report from the Scottish Football Supporters Association called Rebuilding Scottish Football, a fan-led review of the game, which is calling, amongst other things, for supervision and regulation of the governance, the finance and the conduct of the way our game is run. And that, of course, includes the women's game, need for much more investment in the women's game. I'm happy to wish the best of luck to both sides. I'm English born. I'm Scottish by identification, I suppose you could say now, but I'm interested in the future of the game. And I must admit, I hate the kind of jingoism of the country of my birth around this. So if Spain win, well done to them. But it's really the future of the game that matters.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you for. You're quite right. We should say something about women's football. I mean, I know nothing about it, but I asked a friend the other day, and he said, "Well, the one thing about women's football is that they don't drop like men's players do if somebody tackles them and stuff like that." So, yeah, Siobhan, why do you think the English are so confused with Humza Yousaf's response? If I can be, please don't think that is anti-English in any way at all. I've just hit my mic there. Sorry, Simon.
Simon, I'm going to be honest, I listened intently to you all the way through until you mentioned football, and then I just thought, oh God, football bores the life out of me. I mean, I like the fact that women's football's coming, more to the fore, which is always good. But this is, I think Simon kind of, probably summed it up a wee bit there. It's that kind of that jingoism that seems to kind of come to the forefront. Why won't you support us? Why won't you support us? Do you know what? It doesn't matter what Humza does, he will always be criticised, and this is the problem. To use that is kind of for political football, if you excuse the pun. But I'm just going to kind of paraphrase Humza. Honestly, geez, come on. There's much more important things to think about here, rather than whether the First Minister is going to kind of go for the Lionesses or not. As he said himself, he's probably going to be busy. Cost of living crisis, energy crisis, general election to win, where people are starving, they're going to freeze in the winter. Let's get a sense of kind of perspective here, and let's let Humza get on with the job that he said he was going to do. And God save me, just let it be.
Yeah,
Done.
I couldn't agree more with you, Siobhan, there. And I should say, for those who are watching who don't like football, an important thing to remember is that football is deeply woven into many communities in Scotland. It has the capacity to create and be a vehicle for huge change around health, education, and other things as well. It's important as a major cultural industry in Scotland. So I sympathise with those who, unlike me, don't love the game, but the game is important for all kinds of other reasons. And Siobhan is quite right. I mean, it's pathetic to attack Humza Yousaf on that. I'm an English person who doesn't particularly support England. I've regularly followed the Scottish football team for many, many years, the national team and so on. We can make those kind of choices, but it's a pathetic kind of right-wing English nationalism that demands that everyone gets behind us and actually ignores the real issues about the game, which are about how it invests in the community in the future and how we strengthen the economic position of women as well. We need equality of income for sportswomen as well as for sportsmen.
Thank you, Simon. I'd also just a last note, because we're well over time now, but I think it's interesting that the women's team are called the Lionesses, but the men aren't called the Lions. So I wonder what's going on there. But that's the end of the show. Siobhan, thank you. Simon, thank you also to both of you for giving up a huge chunk of your weekend to us here. Really appreciate it. That's about it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month or just a one-off donation, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Right now we have an incredibly pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay our bills and to ensure that we're able to continue making programmes like this one. We've raised over £12,000 so far, but we urgently need to raise the remaining £18,000 within the coming week if possible. So please help us to do that. Just once again, thank you to Simon, thank you to Siobhan, and let you get on with the rest of your weekend. And goodbye and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.